Hello, folks.
All right.
Thanks for joining us. We are at 11:01. We're going to be prompt on this because this is going to be, it's probably going to take the full hour we have scheduled. So we appreciate you being there, being here. There we go. And the slides are going to pop up here. And let's jump into it. Reciprocal tariffs and other recent announcements, the what, why, and how. So, I had to laugh to myself when we first prepared this slides. This first picture, it kind of conveys calm and a normal shipping industry. We're really not in those times. There's lots of uncertainty. There's constant changes, and with that, I ask all of you to keep in mind two things. One, the content discussed in this training is accurate as of April 17th at about 11 a.m. Mountain Standard. I completely expect changes to happen to what we're talking about. And so we have Meredith Lambert. Many of you are familiar with Meredith. She sends out our educational material. She sent you the invite for this meeting, and she supported us to create put all this material together. I'm Travis Smith. I'm the president at TRG. I've spent the past 15 years talking to importers about their customs bond and cargo insurance, and also talking during this presentation, we'll have Rachel Bauman. Rachel is our claims and underwriting manager. She monitors sufficiency for our clients. She heads the push to help clients through any claims that may arise. So she has invaluable real life experience with all these topics we're talking about today. And just a quick note about TRG. We've been in business since 1991. We're headquartered in Bozeman, Montana. Our business model is direct to importer. So as we're experiencing today, our push is to work directly with the importer of record. We certainly do have some key relationships with customs brokers, freight forwarders, insurance agents, or consultants. But in general, 99% of the time, we believe that having that direct relationship or very close relationship with the actual bond holder is what delivers the best product at the best price with the best possible customer service. And those are our two products we specialize in: U.S. Customs bonds and cargo insurance. So you can find more information on YouTube. Many of you have been through our YouTube channel. Many of you watch all of our webinars as they roll out. But if you haven't been to our YouTube channel, if you haven't subscribed, please take the time to do so. You and your teams will find invaluable information. And it really is a wealth of data, because since even before 2018, we put out good information, but really in 2018 moving forward, there's been a lot of good educational content put on there. And with that, keep in mind, we got to give our disclaimer. This is educational material, and it is not legal advice. Submit your questions. We want this to be as back and forth as possible, as conversational. We won't be answering the questions during the presentation. It just wouldn't be manageable with this number of people. But we will try to address everything at the end of the webinar. If we don't get to your question specifically, we will reach out to you. Keep that in mind. Keep an eye out for communication from us after the webinar if we don't address your question now during the webinar. And let's jump into it. Reciprocal tariffs. So why are reciprocal tariffs in place? I mean, we've been hearing about reciprocal tariffs from the campaign all the way through now. Lots of noise, lots of talk. The primary reasons being cited are to raise money for the U.S. Treasury, protect U.S. industries, draw factories and manufacturing back to the United States, and negotiating tactics or leverage to try to get for other governments to do what we would like them to do. The big areas we want to work with other countries on is fentanyl flow into the U.S. or other drugs, as well as illegal immigrants. Of course, that's talked about endlessly. And maybe on this slide, what we don't specifically say, but they do mention trade imbalances, more specifically trade deficits we have with other countries. And that's maybe the biggest glaring reason that how the administration has imposed these reciprocal tariffs The calculation used to get to the reciprocal tariffs is the trade deficit with a country divided by how much how much they import from us, and we take that percentage, multiply it by 0.5, and that's the so-called reciprocal tariff. So trade deficit is a huge, or trade imbalance is a huge factor playing into why these tariffs are in place. So what allows the president to impose reciprocal tariffs? Historically, during the first Trump administration, we saw 301 and 232 used to impose new tariffs. Those tariffs stayed in place during the Biden administration. He didn't pull back on them. In fact, he let exemptions expire throughout his presidency. But now in 2025, the tool that the Trump administration is using to impose these tariffs is the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. So the IEEPA Act. When there's perceived to be unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security, foreign policy, and economy of the United States, those are the justifications for enacting IEEPA. So national security could be considered illegal immigrant flow into the United States, or fentanyl or illegal drugs coming into the United States, foreign policy or economy of the United States. Again, you got the trade deficit, trying to build up manufacturing in the United States so we have a stronger domestic manufacturing platform to support our country in the event of an international conflict. I believe those are the real reasons that they're leaning on to invoke IEEPA now today. And we're going to zero in. I mean, like I said in the beginning of the presentation, there was a lot of noise throughout the campaign, and starting really in December. We have a previous webinar that we did about a month and a half ago. There's been so much going on that really took a bigger look at a lot of the noise and tried to simplify that. You can go back and watch that webinar. But in preparation of this webinar, we felt it important to zero in on really just an 8-day time frame. During these 8 days, from April 2nd to April 10th, is where we saw the most noise, and maybe stuff's leveling out a bit, but we wanted to clarify during this time frame what changes and what we saw go into effect and what we saw being pulled back. So this slide zeroes in on that. So on April 2nd, reciprocal tariffs announced. So 10 to 49% list on specific countries on that list. And then 10% on all other countries not included on that list. Then on April 5th, we saw the 10% go into effect. That is still in effect. And all of you that import, except for those companies that import from US and Canada, or maybe goods subject to 232, still have that 10% in effect right now. And that's still in effect. That hasn't changed. April 8th, we saw the administration impose a tariff rate on goods from China increase to 84%. And it did step up to that 84, but that's the first big jump where we saw that 84% and said, holy Lord, that's higher than we've ever seen before, but it does get higher. And you all know that. April 9th, the 10 to 49% goes in effect. So that's the list that the president held up during his presentation in the Rose Garden, that up to 49% on specific countries. That stayed in effect for 24 hours before it was put on pause for 30 days. And on April 9th.
It was paused for 90 days. It was paused for 90 days.
What did I say?
Oh, you said 30. So
okay, sorry about that.
30,
yeah, it is 90 days. It is not 30 days. So we have 90 days to see what happens next. Thanks, Meredith. And then on April 9th, also, the tariff rate on China increased to 125%. So another huge jump up. April 10th, reciprocal tariff paused except for China. And so that April 9th to April 10th date, that's the 24 hours. And then on April 10th, we saw that rate higher than 10% paused for 90 days. So what reciprocal tariffs are still in effect? 10% tariff on all imported goods. It's on a 90-day pause right now. and that will expire on July
No,
9th.
no, no.
So
Sorry. This is not on pause. This is the one that is not
still
on
in
pause.
effect.
Yeah.
Sorry, I have a
Sorry.
lot of pop-ups happening on my computer right now. I'm
Yeah.
trying to ignore. So yeah, the 10% is still in place, and the 90-day pause for the higher tariffs will be revisited on July 9th. So as that date approaches, we'll get more news on that. And then the 125% tariff on imported goods from China, including Hong Kong. So that stacks on the original 20% that the administration had put on China. So we're up to 145% on top of any 301 tariffs that were enacted in the 2018 to 2022 time, as well as any standard duties or taxes, as well as any anti-dumping or countervailing. So in effect, there are many companies that are facing a 200% or higher tariff on goods from China. And then zeroing in specifically on China to try to provide some clarity, the reciprocal tariffs that went into effect on April 10th are in effect, and it's at 125%. Now, to get to the 145%, you got to include the 20% that was put into effect. It started in early January and then raised to 20% in February. So that gets us to our 145% put into effect during 2025. And then on top of that are the 301 tariffs that were put in place during the first Trump administration, and some of the exemptions were rolled back during the Biden administration. And that varies from 7.5 to 25%. So there you get to the 145%, you add on the 301, and then on top of that, any standard taxes and duties from China, as well as anti-dumping or countervailing that might apply. And then what exclusions are there? There are some exclusions to these tariffs. So donations, informational material is exempt. You have the 232 duties. If you are subject to 232, then you are exempt. So that right now primarily it applies to steel and aluminum goods, and then automobile goods and automotive parts, automobiles and automotive parts that are subject to 232 are exempt, but you have those 232 duties to handle. And copper, pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, lumber articles, and certain critical minerals and energy products. All articles from a trading partner subject to column 2 duty rates are exempt. But we are now just kind of in real time seeing a lot of news about possible future Section 232 actions. So what we're seeing is a very strong likelihood of pharmaceuticals and semiconductors, or goods containing semiconductors in the near future, may have a 232 rate applied to them. So that's a big thing to keep an eye on that will affect many importers. Countrywide exemptions. Canada and Mexico are exempt from reciprocal tariffs on goods that fall under USMCA regulation. So that exemption is in place right now. That might be rolled back, but that's maybe a very good thing for many companies, considering there are first and second shipping partners, international trade partners with Canada and Mexico. And Rachel, I think you're going to handle this for when are goods considered entered.
Thanks, Travis. So when the goods are considered entered is the main factor in determining whether or not these tariffs apply. So there are two main dates that Customs uses, entry date versus date of arrival. And per Customs publications, these tariffs apply based on the entry date. So this is determined by the date that the entry summary is submitted to Customs and the date the goods arrive at the port of entry. So the goods must be physically present within Customs custody for the tariffs to apply. If you have discrepancies in that data, you can end up with liquidated damages or supplemental duty bills for the additional tariffs owed. And we'll kind of go into a little bit of a timeline in this next slide. Yep. So here's a sample timeline, really vague kind of sample timeline of how this can work with an entry. So oftentimes the entry summary will be filed before the goods even leave the foreign port. You have all your information necessary to make entry. So you submit that to customs and then your goods leave that foreign port. So say between that and when the goods arrive in the United States, there is a tariff increased or imposed. That when those goods arrive, they're going to be subject to that tariff. Now you do have 10 days to pay your duties, taxes, and fees to customs from when those goods arrive at the port and you make entry. So say there was another tariff that was increased between then and when you pay the duties, the entry date, and when you pay the duties, you are not subject to that secondary increased tariff rate. Anecdotally, in the claims department, we are seeing some claims being issued because of this. And we're seeing discrepancies in customs data. I have an importer where customs is saying the entry date was April 2nd, but the information the importer has says it was March 21st. And they did receive a penalty for not paying the tariffs. So they are likely going to petition that based on the information that they have available, and hopefully will be able to prove that they shouldn't have to pay those tariffs. But this is it's a clear example of why you really should be paying really close attention to your entry information and making sure that what's being submitted to customs is accurate. So we're going to briefly discuss policy changes on de minimis. This is going to be a pretty high-level overview of what's going on here because we do want to do another webinar specifically about de minimis. So if you have specific de minimis questions, stay tuned because we might be able to answer those in another webinar.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel.
Okay,
I think I'll jump on these. Yeah.
Okay.
And what is de minimis? You know, many of our clients maybe took for granted or didn't recognize de minimis for what it was because it's been in place for a long time. De minimis value is a threshold below which imported goods are exempt from tariffs or taxes. So during the Obama administration, they raised that de minimis value to $800. So effectively, any shipment into the United States that was valued at $800 or lower could flow through into our country effectively without customs oversight, which seems just crazy now, and without paying duties and taxes. That really facilitated a ton of business, a ton of trade. But as anybody can imagine, as soon as bad actors identified that goods were flowing into the U.S. without effectively oversight or the normal customs regulation, normal customs documentation, it's just a massive loophole for illegal goods, specifically drugs or firearms. You imagine it, any crazy thing that somebody wants to smuggle into the U.S. was coming in through de minimis. And on top of that, if there's very little very little documentation, how do you know the goods are valued at less than $800? So this was a big hole in our border security. And the de minimis is becoming much more of a talking point, and it is going to everybody. It is going to affect everybody that imports and use this de minimis capability, because as you'll see in the next slide, the big change is the announcements made on April 2nd and April 8th. De minimis shipments, which would, again, traditionally just flow in through the border without any duties or taxes, will be subject to either a 90% duty rate or a value of $75 per item, increasing to $150 per item. And so effectively, prior to this change, again, companies were able to import samples or very small value shipments legally without oversight or having to pay additional money. That's all going to change. So that will impact companies that had small shipments. I mean, if you're seeing in the news, Temu, Shein, are the biggest examples of companies that capitalize on de minimis shipments. They've already announced pricing increases. So naturally, we write the U.S. Customs import bond. How does all of this impact your bond? And many of you that have seen our presentations in the past, you've seen these slides, but we cannot stress enough the real life impact on increased duties and taxes of these new tariffs is the importer of record is paying more money. So on the left side, you see traditional values of duties and taxes being paid to customs. On the right side, as you see entries made during that sufficiency bond period, the amount of duties, taxes, and fees skyrocket. So the bond calculation, your import bond, is based on duties, taxes, and fees. And as a result, many U.S. importers are going to face an increased bond size. We'll go in a second and show what we've seen in the past, but thinking about it logically, with the huge uptick in tariffs, there's unpredictable. We're putting customs in an unpredictable scenario. Importers of record have to have a sufficient bond in order to import. If you don't have a bond, if you have an insufficient bond on file, you cannot import. So we will see huge increase in duties and taxes paid. Customs is going to be monitoring those duties and taxes to identify insufficient importers. And it's yet to be seen. Normally they send out their insufficiency notices during the first week of every month. Normally, the insufficiency notices give the importer 30 days to act. Now, during the first trade war, 2018, 2020 timeframe, we did see a handful of insufficiency notices that suspended the bond, that rendered the bond insufficient immediately. So they did not give the importer that 30-day notice. Those were very specific. That was a very specific handful of examples where the importer truly blew the bond size out of the water very quickly. But given the changes in the increase, these big increases in tariffs, we expect to see that happen again with importers. So if you're an importer and you're seeing your bond capacity being blown out of the water over one or two shipments, which can absolutely happen, especially the way the tariffs are right now with China, you very importantly need to start talking to your bond provider and talking about a larger bond, because you may get that insufficiency notice that will render your bond suspended or insufficient immediately. We haven't seen that yet, but really these increases to bond sizes are going to hit in May. So it'll be interesting to see if we see that with our bond clients. And the other really unpredictable thing that I think we might start seeing with customs is going back to the usual practice with customs, as they send out insufficiency notices during the first week of every month. Under this new world where customs is on their heels more than ever and they're trying to keep up with the workload, they might adjust how they send out these insufficiency notices and might start sending them out throughout the month, which, these little changes affect the importer of record. There's a lot of fallout from these increased tariffs, and these bonds are, they're down the line, but we're seeing customs with an unprecedented workload. So as the importer of record, the best idea is to keep an eye on your bond sufficiency and be very proactive in getting that new bond on file. The other party that you really need to think about, so you as the importer of record, your priority is not letting goods get stopped at the border by keeping a sufficient bond. Customs is the other party you got to think about, because they monitor the bonds and they'll render your bond insufficient, and their workload is just way different than it had been in the past. And the third party I want to talk about very briefly is the insurance company that underwrites the bond. The fact of the matter is there are limited insurance companies that underwrite these bonds. There's about 50 or 60 in the entire country. So there's a limited capacity for their liability to take on this risk. How they're going to react to these much higher bond sizes is yet to be seen. So you add all this up, the importer that has to import, customs who's dealing with this new workload, with all these new de minimis shipments and these bond increases and everything else that goes along with it, identifying country of origins, screening everything. And then the insurance companies that are taking on much, much, much higher bond sizes. As attendees to this webinar, please be on alert that you need to be forward thinking about your bond. Work with your bond provider to get them the information they need to work on your behalf with the insurance companies or the markets to get you that larger bond as quickly as possible. You don't want to be dragging your feet on this. You want to be as much of a team player as possible. And you don't want to be caught in maybe the bottom third of companies that just aren't paying attention, and it's not going to work out well for them. So let's look at what we saw in the past during the first trade war, and just to maybe drive home a bit of what we saw in the past and how we can learn from it now. And keep in mind the 301 tariffs implemented during the first Trump administration are not nearly, and 232 tariffs are not nearly as far reaching as what we're seeing today. Prior to the first Trump administration, we would see, I'd laugh, 5 or fewer increases a month. And then boom, they pop way up, 3, 4, 5 times what we normally saw. And that's during 2018, Emeritus. If we look at the 2019 timeframe, as high as 76. And please, when you see these numbers, it's very important to stress that as a bond provider, TRG has an automated bond sufficiency program. So we, as a bond provider, reach out to our bond clients once you hit 80% sufficiency. Now, in this new world with 145% tariffs on China, there is a scenario where you might have 2 shipments or 3 shipments that blow the bond size out of the water before we get ahead of the emails. But 90% of the time, you are getting notified by TRG to increase your bond before you get the increased letter to customs. So these numbers are probably smaller. They're much smaller than what we would have saw with our bond clients if we hadn't had that sufficiency program in place. So most of the time we identify the importer trending towards insufficiency. We get all the underwriting done ahead of time. Sometimes the client chooses to chooses to increase their bond before the insufficiency notice is received. But many of our clients, and this is generally the best way to handle it, they get everything lined up, wait for the insufficiency notice, and then pull the trigger and terminate the small bond and place the larger bond. But what I'm trying to drive home is because we get ahead of the insufficiency notices, these numbers may be much higher. They may have been much higher. And then, in real life, now what's happening in 2025, the increased tariffs are much more far reaching than what we saw in the 2018, 2019 timeframe. But again, driving home, there are 3 parties with the bond. There's the importer of record, there's customs, and there's U.S. Customs. So, and there's the insurance company. There's the importer, U.S. Customs, and the insurance company that underwrites the bond. So please keep that in mind. You got to be working with if you understand it from the perspective of every party involved in the bond, you have a better perspective on the product, the import bond that allows you to import, and you're better set up to be able to deal with this turmoil as efficiently as possible. So in all of you that have been to our bond webinars before, you've seen this in the past, but we use this as a bridge, to understand what you can control, what you can't control, and specifically what you can control, how TRG can support, as we believe we support as an outlier. So you can't control these tariffs. I encourage you all to write letters to your Congress people and try to influence your elected officials as best as possible and speak up and be loud. But at the end of the day, the administration is going to do what the administration is going to do. You can't control if customs requires an increased bond. That's a big part of what we talked about today. But you can control where you import from, monitoring your entries and monitoring your bond sufficiency. So, where you import from, have a clear country of origin, definitely know that your goods are possibly classified. Be very incredibly cautious of any supplier from overseas that thinks they come to you with a solve all for these duties and tariffs or some way to reduce them. There are a lot of schemes out there that are not within customs regulations. So be careful if anybody says they have a solution that seems a little bit fishy. And then specifically monitoring your entries and monitoring your bond sufficiency. This is where TRG is an outlier for the importer of record. This is where we provide support that no other bond agency does. And on the next slide, we'll show just a quick glimpse of this. We keep track of your import data. We get the information from customs. We make it available to you, but not just in a raw, hard to follow, hard to identify format. We've put a lot of effort and a lot of programming behind creating a software that all of our bond clients have access to. You can choose to use this. You don't have to use it. All new bond clients get this for free for a full year. As your data builds up in the software, you get it free for a full year. All existing bond clients can use it for free at this point for a 3-month period. After that, this is a service we charge for because it's in addition to the bond. There's a lot of programming on the back end that we make this available, but the cost is very, very, very low. It depends on your bond size. It ranges from between $300 as high as $1,000 in the world of software. I think that's very fair. And with the peace of mind and control and transparency that you get as the importer of record, it's invaluable. And this is just a quick snapshot. We take your data and apply scores to it. So you can see as soon as you open up the software, you use your username and password, you log in and you can see your import compliance score. You can see your unliquidated entry score and your compliance score. You can see if there's any demand on surety. It's not in this snip right here, but right below there, it says what demands immediate attention. So peace of mind, clarity on data and access to your data. This is a very good tool that our clients are loving to help them see clarity through all of this noise. And do we have another snip on Eagle Eye Ace, I believe? That's the other part. There's all the data to support this available to the users of this software, but we always highlight that with this software, a TRG bond client at any time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, can log in and see their bond capacity. So you can see, as you can see in this example, the green line in the middle is showing that this example is at about 50% bond capacity. Of course, all of you that import, there are countless things you got to keep an eye on. This allows you to keep an eye on bond sufficiency whenever you want. This is live data. It updates as you import. So if you're a TRG bond client and if you sign up for this software, you can have this peace of mind. All right. And the final slides, we dig a little bit deeper into this bond sufficiency breakdown. There's a quarterly breakdown so you can see the data behind your bond sufficiency and see where it's trending. One big takeaway is please, folks, please understand your bond. Hopefully you understand these tariffs a bit better. Now, keep an eye on bond sufficiency, have a plan in place, bring your team together to identify how quickly you can term and replace your bond when you do need to increase it. And TRG, we can be here as best we can. I've given you a little glimpse of what we do differently as a bond provider with this software. And we do really consider this best practice in the industry to have access to this data. So we love when clients sign up for it. We need everybody that imports with any significant volume using this or something similar to it. And I think the next question, submit questions. So that's our content. And Rachel, Meredith, I think we got through it pretty quickly. I thought it would have took longer, but.
But thank you so much for everybody for joining us. Keep an eye out too. We're going to be trying to do some more specific webinars on de minimis and things like that, trying to keep up as much as we can. So thank you again. And thanks, Travis and Rachel.
Thanks, Meredith. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.